a lot of slides because this is hugely complicated. They made it so difficult.
I know. I took a look at some of the by the way, I just went live. I took a look at some of the application form today. It is quite complicated.
Yeah, I read it on Sunday, and it's like as you read it, and then I read the Forbes guy interpretation, and as you go, there are so many dates in there. There are actually 10 different pay periods.
That's crazy.
To look at. 10 different span of times. And I'll go through that here as we get started. I'll walk it through. I've taken a couple of days, and you really have to look at it and say, what does it say?
I started looking at it, and I thought, you know what? It's a good job Chris is going to go over it this afternoon.
Yeah, I tell you just as well. And payroll companies are going to have a problem, I think, actually getting the stuff together. And I think bookkeepers are going to struggle with it.
Well, I guess that we don't want to make it that easy. Not we, they probably don't want to make it that easy to forgive it, right? If you're going to be forgiven, you're going to have to work for it.
Well, I guess so. I also think that it looks to me that afterwards they said, look, well, people are having a problem with the exceptions and those kind of things. So let's make it more escape hatches. There's a bunch of safe harbors in there. I think that kind of our ways out. But it also increased the complexity quite a bit.
Welcome to everybody who's joining. I can see a few people are filtering in. We launched the call a couple of minutes early, so you probably heard Chris and I having a banter back and forth about the PPP forgiveness. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to let some more people filter in, and then we'll get going. So just if you're on the call already, just bear with us. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes.
Can people actually see me?
They can see you when you're talking. Otherwise they see your screen.
Got it. So I guess we're not going to get to go to the beach this weekend, right? It's not going to be good weather, even if it's open.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's going to be rainy all weekend, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's what I saw. And this week, I actually had good news and bad news. I was able to get beach badges for the town, but I could only get seniors.
That's a slap in the face.
Yeah. It's like, here, the other ones are sold out, but you were old enough, you can get a senior. So here you go.
That's bittersweet.
Oh, thank you.
I'd take it as a win.
Yeah.
All right, we'll just give it one more minute, and then we'll We have a lot of slides today, so we'll get started. All right, it is 4:02, so I'm going to kick this off. Welcome, everybody. It is Wednesday, 4 o'clock, and it is time for Chris Carlsson's weekly update on COVID-19 and the SBA funding and PPP loans, etc. My name's Claire. For those of you who've been on these calls before, you already know that. But for the rest of you or newcomers, I am a SCORE mentor, and I also help facilitate these webinars every week. So today I'm going to be helping Chris just moderate some of the questions and help group them together so we can try and get to everyone's questions. There is a lot of content today just because of the new PPP forgiveness rules. So just bear that in mind, but we will try and get to everyone's questions. Again, like every week, please use the Q&A function to put your questions in. Don't use the chat function because we really don't monitor the chat function, and it's easier for us to just follow through with the Q&A function. With that all being said, I am going to hand it over to Chris and let him get started.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our weekly seminar about the SBA process and funding that is out there. And I was going to do something different for this seminar. I have planned on kind of doing a more little long range planning type session, but on Sunday I got my hands on the application for the forgiveness for the PPP loan, started reading it, and realized that I didn't understand it. I could actually, I kept telling myself, really? What does that mean? So I decided I had to sit and really go through this and make out schedules to figure it out, my own kind of amateurish schedules. And that's what I did. And that's what I also realized, that I better go through this with the SCORE clients and the SCORE people. And what I also did with 2 companies I'm associated with, I went through these with the controllers of those companies. And it is complicated, and it has helped me go through it. And I think I have somewhat of a handle on it. I could not promise you that I'm right in everything I'm saying, but I think I am, because typical government thing, it's 11 pages and it goes back and forth and there is cryptic language. So anyway, so I'm going to get started here, and what we're talking about is the PPP loan forgiveness application. So what that all means to start with, the really big picture is that we got PPP loan. Part of it can be forgiven, part or all of it. But the only way it can be forgiven is if we apply for the forgiveness. So at one point in time, after your 8 weeks for getting the expenses together, that be the basis for the forgiveness, there's going to be an application coming from your lender in some fashion, either the PDF one, or they more than likely is going to have something online that where you can do the application. But it's going to be an application. So what that means is that if you don't do the application, you won't have any forgiveness. That we do know at this point. So, and what you have here too, and we are going to send out the PowerPoint here, and there is a link to the actual application here. I'm not going to go through the application. I'm going to go through kind of what we set up with our controllers as kind of a work process to get through this, to understand it, get through it. First, little recap. Money's still available for PPP. If you haven't applied, you know people haven't applied, there's still about $100 billion out there. for PPP. That's the good news. It's still there. It's a good loan. It's cheap, no collateral, no personal guarantees. It doesn't get much better than that. So to jump in here a little bit, first, number one, again, we talked a little bit about it, so we get this out of the way, and that's for sole proprietors. What it looks like at this point is that if you're a sole proprietor, you got it based on Schedule C, then basically automatically 75% of that loan is automatically forgiven. Probably going to have to do some kind of an application anyway, but that's what it looks like. And then you can apply more of the other eligible expenses to the forgiveness. So that's easy from this perspective. Going to put that aside and go on to corporations and multi-members, LLCs. As we said, there is an actual application. It exists, it has a name, has a number, expiration date, all the things that the government does. And on that, you actually calculate the forgiveness amount. And remember, it's based on certain expenses over an 8-week period of time, which already is kind of a little bit muddled to our advantage, and also to look at a good news type thing, and that is that there is real movement in Congress to what it looks like to be 3 things. That 8 weeks may get to 10 or 12 weeks, that the 75% requirement may go down, don't know how much, maybe 50 or something, and the 2 years for payback may go up. Those are the things that it looks like. I doubt that the scrambling in this application will go away. I doubt it. It's already out there, been distributed, it's getting out there, and they probably don't want to rework it because it is hard. I can see that they're having issues with it. But what you have here, so you have payroll cost, you have rent, business mortgage interest, and business utilities. That's the base for calculating the forgiven amount. Then what you have here, you also have restrictions and deductions, and you have safe harbors from those restrictions and deductions. And we're going to go through the premise for this and how it works. First, I probably have to introduce you to some concepts here. And yes, forgive my hat, my hair is getting long, I haven't had a haircut forever, and it itches my forehead. So here, kind of different concept. In this, there are 3 different ways to arrive at the forgiveness. And out of those 3 ways, the lesser one will apply, the one that produces the least forgiveness. So here they have concepts. Covered period. That's the 8 weeks we have talked about. And they've talked about 8 weeks from funding. There is now some good things around that because there had to be, otherwise you could actually not do this. That you can adjust that pay period of 8 weeks from funding to be starting when your first pay period starts. So you can adjust a little bit when you want that to start. It's up to kind of a week, depending on what your payroll periods are. That's the covered period. That's the base. That's the basis for everything. You have reference periods. Those are look-back periods in which periods you compare your covered period to see if you're going up and down in different things. Then you have FTE modifications, that full-time equivalents, where we compare, we have to do the calculations ourselves, compare our full-time equivalents in the covered period to a period in the past, that is the reference period. And if we are less, we get to reduce the amount. If we're more, we don't get to increase it. Then you also had wage and hour reductions. And that basically looking at the same thing, covered period of time, what's the average rate of pay by person in the covered period compared to the first quarter of 2020. And this is all encompassed in producing tables. You have table 1, that is a list of all the people making $100,000 or less. You have a table 2 of people making over $100,000. And then you have a line at the end for the owner. So in none of these table, owner is included, never included in the actual calculations here until you get to the very end. Safe harbors, and unless you kind of been, oops, let me go back there. I kind of in this kind of things and in legals and that kind of stuff, safe harbors may be not familiar with people, but basically in this case, it's escape hatches. When you do the calculations and it says, whoops, I'm going to get a bunch of deductions from my forgiveness, then there are a number of escape hatches that then lets you compare some other dates. And if you make those, then you don't have to make the deductions. That's what the safe harbors are. So hang with me a little bit here. There is a lot, so I'm going to try to get through as much as possible. Take a break somewhere and take questions, but we should get through this. So in the very end of all this, this is a more extensive list of calculations that the actual application has, because application leaves out a couple of steps, and I prefer to have them in there. And I have almost done with an Excel program that we made that does this kind of automatically with the tables. But what you have here, you start with a payroll cost, including health and benefits and payroll costs, payroll taxes, business mortgage interest payments, business rent, utilities. That becomes the total eligible forgivable expenses. Then you take your deductions from the full-time reductions, from the pay reductions, and then that becomes an alternative A forgiveness. Then you compare that to the PPP loan amount, that is alternative B, and then alternative C is the 75% requirement, where you take line 1, divide by 75. Now that's the top. And then you pick the least of that. We're actually going to make an example to go through that. I know it's probably seems muddy now. So here we're going. So this is the basis for the tables. This is what the table really looked like. You have an employee name, an employee identifier, which would be the same number as you have on your payroll report, the cash compensation, the average FTE, and we get into how we calculate that later, and the salary wage reduction, which is the most complicated here. All those gets into a table that is in the application. And so there's table 1 and table 2, and the basis for the table is for the covered period, the 8 weeks that you may not have started. And a full-time equivalent stops at 40 hours. So when you have an employee who works an average of 45 hours in a week, you only get to count 40. So overtime over 40 don't count. Otherwise, all the full-time equivalents are compared to 40 hours per week. And that's important when we start defining payroll periods here. Unfortunately, I've looked at too much of this, so I'm kind of getting into it. So let's look at payroll periods. And I know I'm probably starting to lose a bunch of people now, but maybe if you don't really look at all the details now, you can do that later, but kind of grasp the concept of what's going on. You actually look at 10 different period of times where we have to produce payroll reports and tables for. I've listed them here. The numbering is my own. And they have different purposes. The two first ones are really kind of gates for you comparing number one to number two to see if you're going to go and do a safe harbor calculation. Then you have your base coverage period. Then you have your first quarter. Then you have February through June last year. Then you have January through February this year. You have any 12 weeks during summer last year. You have the week of over June 30. You have the week of over January 1st this year. And you have the week of the last week of your covered period. So at this point, just kind of remember, there are 10 different things that you got to look at. That's where the complications come in. Don't try to learn these now. We'll send this to you. You can go over it with your bookkeeper, etc. And always remember, the number 7 here is only for seasonal employers. And so we're going to need from a payroll by person is you're going to have hours worked. We're going to have to figure out how many weeks we have. We got to do this for full weeks because it says 40 hours per week. So we got to figure that we got to have payroll periods that actually are weekly or based on week. Most payroll systems are. And then we have to have the cash compensation for that period of time. From there, we have to actually then calculate the average compensation, 75% of the average compensation in a specific time period, compare the two, calculate full-time equivalents for many different periods and compare them. And then in addition, the basis is that we have the total compensation and the state and local payroll taxes. All right. Let me just do this and then maybe we can take some questions. So take a deep breath and talk about covered period. This is the period of time where we talked about, referred to as 8 weeks. So now we always said it's from the date of funding. That has changed. You can do it from the date of funding, but unless you got the date of funding in the beginning of a pay period, I don't know how you're going to do it. It's very hard to get a payroll period, that payroll report that doesn't correspond with your payroll periods. So what they said was that then you can actually move the start of the 8 weeks to correspond with the first beginning, with the beginning of the first payroll period. And for most people, that's probably a good thing, because most people, unless you're completely closed down, etc., are probably starting to ramp up. So in terms of money paid for actual valid expenses, it's a question of, is the first week better than kind of the 9th week, moving everything down? So that's what you have. Other important thing here, reading through this, it appears that they're saying that this goes for 8 weeks and you're counting what you actually pay in the 8 weeks. Then when you come to the 8th week, you may, I think, that you may actually then also count what you incurred in that 8th week, provided that it's paid in the next available payroll So there's a possibility that you could squeeze in 9 weeks here, possibly. All right. Should we do some questions, Claire?
Yep, sorry, I had demuted. Let's take some questions. We have a few have come in. So first one is from Lois. Does the PPP forgiveness need to be reduced by the EIDL advance?
Yes. The application will ask you how much you got in the EIDL advance and the number for that EIDL loan to correspond that to. And yes, there is nowhere, that's the only place on the application. It's interesting because as you get to the calculation and the application says, okay, here's the lesser of the amount to be forgiven. Then in the instructions, it says, if appropriate, SBA will then deduct from the forgiveness the EIDL advance. So the answer is yes. Will it really happen in every case? No idea. You are not required to actually take it out of the calculation. So don't take it out of the calculation. It's up to the SBA to do it.
Okay, now a question from Greg. Is the SBA now, hang on, is the SBA accepting now EIDL non-agricultural applications?
I think so. I think that they moved people over to EIDL again and started ramping up that. How I heard it was that they are also accepting agricultural applications.
Okay. If a sole proprietor hires an employee for the 8-week loan period, can the payroll costs be taken from the remainder of the loan?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Logic would dictate that you could. Will there be a facility to actually do it? I don't know if that will work or not. As we go, we're going to do some thinking about that, because whoever asked this question is not the only one with that. The presumption is that sole proprietors don't have employees, which is not always true. So I think we're going to figure that out. So right now, the answer is really yes and no, unfortunately.
Okay. If people are on the payroll 9 months in 2019 and not payroll, only 1099 for the rest of 2019 to February 2020, can they apply for unemployment?
Yes, 1099 people, they did, I think every state has amended their, and has provisions that is simplified for independent contractors to file for unemployment, and I think they should. I do work as self-employed, and I pay payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, so why not? Yes, and what I hear is that yes, you can.
Okay. Our LLC got PPP for guaranteed payments to partners. Do we have to spend PPP on the same partners that were in the original calculation? There were 10 partners in the calculation.
I don't believe so. I think if you change partners, I believe that you can count who you're paying out. That is not, the PPP isn't partner specific. It is corporation, company specific. So I believe so. I would definitely do it, and would up to somebody to kick it back. I'm going to write that down. That's a good question, but I believe so.
Do you think there will be other provisions in the forgiveness period for businesses that are still closed and cannot utilize this, or even to pull employees off unemployment because they make more money on unemployment? And I would run out of funds to match that pay because that was not in the W-3 I submitted to receive on the loan.
Yes. It's multi-question here. Yeah. And the issue of that there people making more money on unemployment than coming back to work. So keep your records of who you are asking to come back to work and that they are declining. You need a records. There is actually provision in the tables for putting that back as not being a deduction. However, what you don't have the payroll costs. So it's not in the forgiveness calculation to start with. And first part of the question, are there going to be changes to that? Yes, I absolutely think there are going to be changes. As we said in the beginning, I believe that the 8 weeks is going to be extended. I believe that the payroll component is going to be requirement is going to be decreased, and I also believe that the payback period is going to be elongated substantially. All right, so let me go on a little bit. So try to get through more of this. So this is just in here as an example of a payroll report. We're going to need to extract out of that is hours, is amounts, is the state and local payroll taxes, and in the end, the total amount of compensation for any period of time that we're going to talk about is going to have to be reported on the payroll and extracted out in report format. And you're going to have to, if you have any kind of substantial employees, you're going to have to get that dumped into Excel, or it's going to be very difficult. So we have calculated our total forgiveness potential from employee costs, from payroll costs. So now we have to look at reductions. And there are two reductions. One for FTE, which means that we're comparing the covered period to reference period. Straight proportional is that if our FTE in the covered period is 15 and it's 30 in the reference period, and we get to the reference period, you should pick the ones good for you. Then 15 and 30, it's 50%. Your forgiveness in one of the calculations is going to be multiplied by 50%. Reductions in average wages, that is also comparing, as we said, covered period to first quarter and 75% average pay rate compared to the covered period. Then again, safe harbors and safe gates. So here is kind of an ugly thing, but it shows how the FTE reduction is constructed. And say you have 9 of the 10 here. So first thing you do is you look at the period of time from 215 to 426. And now you have to think how you get actual full 40-hour weeks in there, actual pay weeks in there, because 15th is a Saturday, I think, and the 26th is a Sunday. So it doesn't correspond. So you got to figure that out. So you have all the paper in there. And then compare that to the pay period of 215.20. And if the first one is bigger than the second one, you have to now calculate this. And it's now using two different things to calculate it. You go to the covered period, and then you pick one of these three of them here, 5, 6, or 7. I know getting complicated, don't try to remember, just kind of get the concept. 5, 6, 7, you pick the one that's best for you. Don't just pick one. Your bookkeeper is going to have to help you pick one. Which are we going to use? Because you use one. I used, just because we had done a big calculation for one company that is favorable to do the first quarter, a little bit of seasonal business. So here we compare the covered period from to the first 2 months of this year, and the full-time equivalents. This is just an example. 5.95 compared to 5.06 in the covered period. So that's 85%. There's a 15% reduction. Now, we start looking at safe harbors. So then the first one is number one, 215 to 426, bigger than 215 to 20. If it is, you now go and period 2, sorry, 215 bigger than the first one. The 215 is bigger than the 215 to 426. I know it get complicated, you can look at it later. Then you go and compare 630 to 215. And if 630 is bigger than 215, you got a safe harbor, you don't have to do the reduction. You have another bite at the apple, and that is that if the last week of the covered period is larger than the week over January 1st, then you have also safe harbor. How they came up with this, I have no idea, but that's the way it is. So then you look at, did I have a safe harbor? Yes, no, no. Then you have an 15% reduction. All right, let me move this up here a little bit. So then we go into wage reductions. Again, you compare 75% of the average pay rate by person in the first quarter to your covered period, average pay rate for the same person. If a person's rate has gone down by more than 75%, we have to make a deduction unless we have a safe harbor. Same kind of concept as in the other one. So then what we do to calculate here, we do the covered period, compare for each person to the first quarter of this year. And how it's calculated, I get into just in a couple of minutes. Then, if, as we did in this case, we would have a deduction of $900. So if you care about the $900 getting paid back or not, if you do, then you go and try out to see if you have a safe harbor. So in this case, remember, I'm not the one who's complicating it here. I'm kind of just trying to show you what it is. Here again, you're comparing 215 to 426 with 215 alone. That is pay period. So if you have bigger number in 215 to 426, then you go on and do the calculation. If you're lower in the 215 to 426 than 215, you go on to do a safe harbor calculation. And that is now comparing 630 again to 215.20. And if that is higher, you have a safe harbor for that particular person. You have to do it for each one. Have fun. So again, if you have a safe harbor, no deduction. If you don't have a safe harbor, then you get the deduction for what the total is adding up for all these people. So what will it actually look like? So we made this little schedule this morning to have an example to send to our payroll companies and to our controllers, so they can take this and blow it up to the schedules to the actual payroll. So what happens here? For example, in this case, we selected the reference period of January and February this year and said we want to look at our full-time equivalents for those 2 months. We did, and in table 1, we had 4.95, and in table 2, we had 1. So we had in that 5.06. And we had 4.95 plus 1 in schedule 2 for those 2 months, 5.95. In the covered period, we had 5.06. That's where it came from. How do we get it? Well, simply here's where you have to have that. You actually take the actual hours people worked, only up to 40 hours. Anything over 40 hours becomes a 1. And then you compare by person, then how many full-time equivalents they have, you put that into the table, and you add it up. That is why for the comparison periods, you have to figure out how many weeks of 40 hours do you have. In this case, we actually determined that we were wrong in the 1/1 to 2/29. There is actually 11 weeks that we actually can do the payroll reports for. So we have to compare that, and then if our full-time equivalents are lower, we get to look at the safe harbors, etc. Then in the wage decrease reduction, we are then comparing to the first quarter, and these are what becomes complicated here. So you now have to calculate the average wage per hour. Let's stick with hour. There is some other things to do for salaried people, but it comes back to the same thing. If they all 40 hours. So you have calculating the average hourly wage for that first quarter to the average hourly wage in the covered period. But first, you multiply the first quarter average wage by 75%. So you reduce it by 25%. Then you compare that by each person. And you see here in this example, there are 2 people that wage rate went down on the average. They could have been piece rate, whatever it is, or they could have been decreased. And then when you have that, now you look at, do we have a safe harbor? You look at the gate and you look at the safe harbor. Both of these cases, no, I don't have a safe harbor for them. Then you figure out how many average hours per week did they work in the first quarter. And you multiply that number by the deficiency, and then you take that number and multiply by 8. If I lost you, I know it took me a while. I know, but that's how it works. So that's why I'm saying, don't try to actually remember this now. Go back to this and cover this with your bookkeeper. So then when you've done all this, you come back to this calculation. That is actually the calculation for the forgiveness. So in our case, we go back here. We had cash compensation in table 1 $39,000. In table 2, 15,000. 54,000 total compensation for the covered period, quote unquote, the 8 weeks. That is what goes here in the worksheet. That goes into this. Then you have the owner's salary. This is where the owner's salary comes in. Then you add 15,000 maximum for the owner for the covered period. That is the maximum you can forgive for anybody over 100,000, including the owner. So then you add that, and you add health insurance, retirement contributions, and the state and local payroll taxes. That in this case adds up to $82,000. So now we take our other eligible expenses: business mortgage interest, business rental lease payments, utility payment. We put that all in here. That adds up to 97 grand, 98. Then remember, we had a deduction of $900 for the reduction of wage rates for 2 people. That comes off. We're now at 97,000. And then we get to multiply that by the 85% for the FTE reductions. So that produces a number of $82,000. The next one we look at, we got a loan for $105,000. That goes in the next line. And then our payroll was $82,000. So in this line, we get to now take that 82,000, divide by 75%, which becomes 109 grand. Now, as we all can see, the lowest of these is 82,000. So we are going to report a forgiveness amount of 82,000. SBA, if they're on the ball, will deduct 6,000, leaving 76,000 something as forgiveness, which means that you have to pay back 28,550. And that becomes, with interest, over 18 months after the first 6 months you don't pay anything, getting to pay back $1,700. I have just one more slide. And if you're tired of this now, I can guarantee you I'm tired of it. But we're only going to have to do this. And I would say get ready. Right now, out of all this stuff, we know most of the things that we need to know. And we should get ready. We need to know what the numbers are. We do know what the numbers are for 215 to 426. They exist. The payroll company can give these numbers to us now, as well as the week that straddles 215, as well as the first quarter, as well as February 15 to June last year, as well as January, February this year, as well if you pick a 12-week period last year where you know you had very little people. And we know what it is for the week over 1/1/20. What we don't know is anything that has to do with the covered period and 6/30 and the last week of the covered period. So I would tell my payroll company and my bookkeeper to get on these now, so I could start looking at it and know what I'm dealing with. Start talking to them and start planning what you want to do. If you don't want to have these $15,000 lower than what it could be, then I would start looking at what can I do without being stupid to the business, of course. If you're just going to pay out $15,000 for nothing to avoid this, to me, then it would be better to pay it back over 2 years than to pay it now. But if there are valid things you can spend it on, then that could be the plan. what do I have here? No, that has to do with that. So those are my slides. That's my watering down and kind of summary on what we have in those 11 pages of forgiveness application. Should we do some questions again?
Yeah, let's do some questions. And just one thing to mention is we are going to send a copy of these slides out to everybody. I know it's a lot of information to digest. So we will send them out after this, or within 24 hours, I think, of this webinar. And Chris, someone has asked if they could have a copy of the actual spreadsheet that you used to do the calculation. Is that available?
Yes, it is. It will take me about it will take us probably a day or two to actually put it into a fashion that somebody else that didn't work it up understands how it works. So, but yes, that's my intention.
Okay, so if you do want a copy of that, I would say email monmouthscore@gmail.com, and we can reply to that email with a copy of it when it's ready. Okay, when applying for forgiveness on PPP, are guaranteed payments payroll costs? So I would say that's guaranteed payments to partners. I am thinking, are they, or LLC part members, are they payroll costs?
If it was part, I believe that it is, if that was part of the original application for the PPP loan, yes.
Okay. For C corporations, if the owners are on payroll, can they be included in the payroll calculation?
Nope. Owners are not included in the payroll calculations. They go on that separate line. So here, I know this is here. I hope you can see this. So when you go through all these calculations with full FTEs and all that kind of stuff, owners are not included. But they get added in as a total forgiveness amount to a maximum of $15,385 for the 8-week period. But they're not in the tables.
Okay. What happens if a PP loan was given on May 4th and we are still closed and we needed to bring back a retired owner? How does the 8-week period work?
Well, there are only two choices for the 8-week period, and that is to start it when you get the money or start it at the next start of a payroll period. And then the question, of course, is you bring him back a retired owner or partner. Is that person still an owner or partner, or is that person becoming a pure employee? If it is, it gets into the tables. If not, it becomes on this line here.
Okay. Is the EIDL a monthly credited amount? Somebody received a credit in her DDA account. How did the SBA come up with the amount?
Oh, the EIDL advance, was that the question?
It's just, is the EIDL a monthly credited amount? I don't think it's relevant to the advance.
No,
or
no, EIDL is not a monthly credited amount. There were three things that existed on the EIDL. There was the advance, which was $1,000 per employee up to 10 grand. And then there was a 15,000 thing that happened that seemed to have been lost somewhere, but it happened. I know people who got it. And then there is the actual loan, which is a lump sum, then payable back over 30 years. And the first amount, the advance, kind of just shows up in your bank account most of the times. The actual loan is a more rigorous process with actual loan documents, and you know if you did it because you're going to have to sign personal guarantees, and it is collateralized. authorized, and they are going to file a UCC. So you know if you did that.
Okay. Is it okay to use all of the PPP for guaranteed payments to partners and the EIDL advance for W-2 employees, as the PPP was granted for partners?
If it's all a question of what you report, right? It's not actually earmarked money. So we start there. So it's what you report where. And at the EIDL, you don't report anything. I don't know, you say what you're going to use it for. For the PPP, you actually report what it is. If the PPP was derived from partner payments, that's how you should report the payments for the forgiveness.
What happens if your full time is not 40 hours?
From this perspective, that animal doesn't exist. It's 40 hours.
Okay. What about commissioned employees? How does that work?
Yeah. I don't see anything other than you count them as 40 hours, either way. And
you just maybe just take their commissions and divide it by, turn it into
which means payment. That if you do well in this, if you're a seasonal business, and from the perspective of average wage type thing, in that type of deduction, if you have very low in the first quarter and then they go up, on the other hand, if your business has tanked now, then you don't do well. But yeah, I don't see any facility there. One of the businesses I'm involved in have quite a few commission salespeople. So that is one thing that we are looking at, and we haven't found any other way than reporting of that. We got to count as 40 hours. There is no other alternative. That's we have found, at least.
Is there a time limit for spending the EIDL advance?
No. No, there's not. And not, I know, I mean, we signed, everybody signed the application. I can't remember exactly what it said, but I don't think so. And then it just shows up in your account. So it's there. And it's said to be spent on some type business expenses, at least. But no, I'm not aware of any time limit. And nobody's going to ask, as far as I know.
So if the sole proprietor earns about 100,000 per year, how much should he draw out per week for 8 weeks in order to get a PPP loan of $20,833 forgiven?
Sole proprietor is different. As of now, as far as I know, I haven't seen anything to the contrary. We go back to this slide. Basically, they're saying that you got a loan based on the average profits you had the previous year. And that all went out to pay you. And we did 2.5 times that. So now we're assuming you make the same money per month as you did then. So you have 8 weeks. That comes to about 75%. So you get automatically 75% forgiven. Then if you have the other eligible expenses, it's said in the guidance that then you can also deduct that. But as far as I know, there might going to be an application, but basically it's automatically 75% forgiven. But look out, as in this, who knows what it's actually going to say.
Okay, there's a question. I have all part-time employees. How do I figure out full-time employee amounts? Also, owner amount is only 15,000 for the full 8 weeks.
Well,
Also got,
that's all, I'm sorry, go on.
oh, go ahead, because I think it's actually a double question. So
Okay,
go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm going to answer the two first. First,
Yeah.
owner, that is what you get to put into the forgiveness amount is the 15,000 for the owner. That is the amount. You can't go over that. For the other, if you don't have full time, what happens is really that you get to say, Jones worked for, your payroll report says 20 hours average per week in this time period. That is compared to 40 hours full time. So you get 0.5 full-time equivalents for that person in all the calculations that you do. That, because you actually do, if in another period of time, Joan works 30 hours, then for that period of time, it's 0.75 full-time equivalents. You got to do the calculations that is in my tables here. Those calculations have to be done.
Okay. And then in this is the same round of questions. If I received the advance from the idle advance of 10,000, can I use all the PPP for payroll and the idle for other business expensive and have both be forgiven?
Well, the answer is yes, because the money it's no different color on the money. It's reporting. You're actually going to report what you are, how much payroll you have, and how much business expenses for rent, etc. you have. The assumption in that reporting is that the PPP money was used. That's the assumption. So I guess the answer is yes.
Okay. Then we have, when you say owners' salaries, does that include guaranteed payments to partners?
Yes, I believe it has to be reported separately, but yes, I am not completely sure how it will be reported because it's not really addressed here. So if this all they're going to come out with, then yes. I believe they're going to have to amend this and say, well, wait a minute, I have a PPP application that has the partner aspects of it that we lent money on, and then we have a payroll part of it that we did this for. That will come out and there will be amendment to this. But as of this now, the answer is yes.
Okay, and then you had a line, do not report this amount. Does that mean that line blank?
No, it does not mean that. It was just the application itself. You're going to see that you have to put in your IDIL advance amount and the loan number. And it tells you that is going to be deducted. And a lot of people are going to come back here to the end and say, oh, I didn't see it. I'm going to deduct it myself. Don't do that. This line here, line 13, doesn't exist on the application. So don't deduct that number out of line 12. Don't do it because you're going to have it deducted twice if you do.
Okay, if we have a sole proprietor working at a home office, can he count the home utilities, phone expense, mortgage interest, storage unit fees, etc. as the forgiven amount? The business mailing address is different to the home address.
Well, would I interpret the rules to say that no, that's not the intention. That's not what they want. And is home utilities not valid expenses? Yes. Can you put it on a piece of paper? Sure you can. Sorry, they're not valid expenses. Can you put it on a piece of paper and will anybody catch it? I don't know. I'm not telling anybody that they should cheat. So I don't think that you're supposed to, no.
Okay. Then we have, if the sole proprietor is the owner with no employees, then the owner's salary of this sole proprietor will count in the PPP forgiven calculation. Is that correct?
Yes. Again, with the whole caveat here that we had for sole proprietors, that as it stands right now, the 75% of that loan amount is automatically forgiven, assuming that you're paying yourself the same as last year. And then you can add on the expenses that the previous question referred to, other valid business expenses that listed.
Okay, then we have the final question, which, and then we can wrap it up from there, is I think I'm going to have to listen to this webinar a few times to understand it. Do we get a copy of the recorded version? And the answer is yes. You can check it out on our Facebook page, which is Monmouth Score, so facebook.com/Monmouth Score, or on our YouTube channel, which is Monmouth Score. It'll be uploaded there within a couple of days. So yes, there is access to look at it a few times, and also we'll email the presentation, the PowerPoint that Chris put together after this as well. So yes is the answer. And that's it for the questions, Chris. And I think it is 5:03 or 5:04 now, so probably a good time to wrap it up.
It is.
So thank you so much for all the really valuable information. I think everybody will find that really helpful. Don't forget, to all our attendees, Chris is here every Wednesday for the indefinite future with help on the SBA funding rules and regulations and news that's coming out. So tune in to see what's new and what he has to offer. And please, if you have other people who need help navigating their way through the SBA world, you know, tell them about this webinar as well. We have webinars on every Friday coming up throughout the summer on various topics, not SBA, but various topics. This Friday, we have Jeff Basser of the New Jersey Division of Travel and Tourism, and he's going to be speaking about things that are going to be happening on the Jersey Shore and ways to attract tourists back down to the shore now that the beaches, etc., are starting to open. So try and check that out as well. All the information is on our website, on our Facebook page. You can register. It'll be a Zoom webinar, much like this format. And I think that is all I have. So Chris, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Next week. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.